Good morning. My name is Kenyatta Skiles. I'm the producer of EYEJ Speaks, and I will be today's moderator. I would like to thank everybody for joining us for today's conversation on civil rights. EYEJ Speaks is an interactive community discussion which features engaging and empowering discussions on social justice, civic engagement, and other important topics. The topics you see here today are derived from our Youth Online Discussing Justice program. Over the course of this hour, we hope that you will leave with some tools you can bring back to your communities and organizations. And whether you're watching on Facebook or Zoom, be sure to ask questions, make comments, and use the hashtag EYEJ Speaks and social justice in the comment section. Also, if you haven't done so already, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. Our handle is EYEJ Cleveland. So just to provide a little bit of background and insight about the work that we do, EYEJ serves over 1,500 youth annually, and our mission is to empower and amplify the voices of teens and preteens by bridging them with diverse individuals to engage in interactive discussions centered around social justice. We do so through programming, which includes Youth Online Discussing Justice, or YODJ, which is a 12-week program for 6th through 12th graders and was created as a response of the COVID-19 pandemic to ensure that young people had a virtual platform to exchange ideas, gain perspective on social justice issues with diverse and empowered community members, peers, and volunteers. And this program takes place twice a week. Also important to the work of EYEJ is the Youth Council. And we have a Youth Council member as a part of this discussion, and you'll hear from her a little bit later. And the EYEJ Youth Council is a group of impressive young people ages 15 to 25 from all across districts in Cleveland who together are brainstorming issues about injustice and challenging both their peers and adults to make some informed and engaged decisions about issues pertaining to the greater Cleveland area. I would also like to mention that currently EYEJ is undertaking an empowerment campaign. So I would like to thank all of the individuals and partners who have donated to this campaign. And your dollars help us to deploy 2 new programs in which technology and online instructional infrastructure and needs to deliver learning programs will be met while youth are sheltered and in place. And additionally, these funds will help EYEJ Youth Council members and their families to cover household costs for bills, healthcare, and other necessities. So we can't do this work without you. And if you want to continue supporting our work, or you want to make a first-time contribution to this impactful programming, please text EMPOWER to 44321. We want you to be part of this great programming and be part of the EYEJ family. So be sure to check out the Empower Giving campaign going on right now. Before we get to our illustrious panel of speakers this morning, I wanted to just open up the conversation. Today, some of you may know, some of you may not know, today would have been, today Tamir Rice would have been 18 years old today. So we are having this conversation about civil rights on his birthday. But I don't want you to take this moment to reflect on the events that took this young man from the world, but rather to remember him as a young man who loved sports, was a talented athlete, excelling in football and basketball. I want people to remember Tamir as a beloved son and brother who had a bright future ahead of him and endless possibilities. Let his legacy and his life compel you to do better in this world, to uplift your communities, and to remember him as a young man that could have been your child, your brother, nephew, cousin, or any other family member. So I want you to ask yourself as you're going through today and listening to this program, how will you spend today, tomorrow, and the days after ensuring that another young Black child is not taken away too soon? And I hope that this discussion compels you to be empowered to take a stand against any injustice you come across. And I'll close this statement out with a quote from Dr. King, who so eloquently stated, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutually tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." So with that, I would like us to begin the program and introduce our speakers. So we're going to do something a little bit different today. I would like the speakers to take 1 minute for an opening statement to provide a summary, brief summary about their work and how it relates to civil rights. So we will start with Mai Moore, and then we will take it from there. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mai Moore. I'm the founder and executive director to EYEJ, Empowering Youth Exploring Justice. And I'll just give a little bit of my background. I am originally from Cleveland Heights, Ohio. I left for 15 years. I lived in Los Angeles, New York, and Turks and Caicos in the Caribbean. And I was in the tech industry. I directly helped 2 companies go public, Travelzoo and United Online. Moved back to Cleveland about 10 years ago. And I had a calling. I was at church and the Trayvon Martin ruling had occurred. And I think why it hit me so hard is the high school that I went to, Cleveland Heights High School, what I learned from it is that we really looked at each other as individuals, not necessarily the color of your skin. And that's really carried through for me. And then also, you know, it's our duty to give back. Our youth are really our future. And I felt like it was my time, and just with my startup experience, to, you know, to create EYEJ along with many co-founders from Plymouth Church. So I'm grateful to do this work, and thank you.
Great. Emily Martin?
Yeah, so my name is Emily Martin. I am the Communications and Outreach Specialist for the Fair Housing Center for Rights and Research in Cleveland. The Fair Housing Center is a fair housing agency, and our mission is to protect and expand fair housing rights, to eliminate housing discrimination, and to promote integrated communities. So we do this through a variety of ways. We have advocates on staff who help people who might be experiencing housing discrimination, or who might just have questions about what their housing rights are, and might not know if they're being discriminated against. But our advocates are available as a free resource to folks who need them. And so we help to enforce fair housing law, and to protect that civil right of fair housing. We also do a lot of education and outreach in the community. So we do presentations and trainings to a lot of different groups, which includes landlords and real estate agents, so that they're aware of their responsibilities as housing providers, to make sure that they know the law and are creating a fair and equal opportunity for everyone. We also do a lot of presentations to student groups or community groups, because we know that it's important for everyone to know their rights and responsibilities under fair housing law, and we just want to promote equitable communities, and we think that housing is kind of a very foundational piece of everyone's lives. So we're here as a resource, and I'm happy to join the panel today.
Thank you. Next, Gordon Friedman.
I guess I represent the elders of this group. I've been a criminal defense attorney since 1968. I worked for the Public Defender's Office. I was the original director of the Free Clinic of Cleveland. I've been teaching at Cleveland Marshall Law School in the areas of criminal law. I was also a civil rights attorney and had filed lawsuits against the city. I represented Tim Russell's family in the 137 Shive case. Tim Russell and Melissa Williams are two people that seem to be forgotten when people talk about victims of brutality. But they were people that were not necessarily part of society. They were outsiders, and they were victims of police misconduct. I'm presently on the Cleveland Police Commission, which is created by the consent decree signed in 2015 that seeks to bring about reform in the city of Cleveland Police Division as a result of their past and blatant transgressions of the law. It's good to be with folks that are probably 50 years younger than me.
Thank you. Thank you. Lori Painter?
Good morning. I'm kind of right behind you, Gordon. That's somewhere in the middle of this group, age-wise. I am a native Clevelander, grew up in Shaker Heights. I like to think of myself as a direct product of, I began school in 1968, and so I was very aware. My parents were very heavily involved in civil rights in Cleveland, and often I found myself waking up under someone's dining room table across a mix of people, which is what I mostly want to talk about. I am a social worker. I am currently faculty at Case Western Reserve in the Graduate School of Social Work, Mandel School. I have been there since 2008. Previously, have a little over 20 years of working primarily with adolescents in treatment foster care. And there, I spent a lot of energy developing programs on diversity training for youth as well as adults in the community here and in one southern state that I will not name. And through that, helping young people develop those independent living skills that they needed to really either combat social issues that they saw, not only for their own development, for those of their community. And so a lot of advocacy, teaching people how to be self-advocates. From there, and what I do currently is I really try to work from the inside out. And so with my students, kind of champion helping people who want to help people. And so what that looks like in terms of how you go about making change and the steps that you need to take is really, how my work relates to what we're talking about today. So not an active activist, but the behind the scenes, preparing people on how to make the most impact with those constituents and how to really reach out and do your homework and be heard. So I'll leave it at that for right now. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Andre Hampton.
Yes, hi, I'm Andre Hampton, and I don't have as big of a background as everyone else, but for me, I'm here speaking on the personal perspective from a veteran and also an Army brat. So I've grown up all over the world in Germany, Arizona, Oklahoma, and the matter of, civil rights, I've never had to really, hasn't really affected me directly, but indirectly in the past, and everyone who's gone before me, from my father, grandfather, veterans who've been through wars and things like that. I'm here to speak on that perspective, but I'm also a father of four. I'm a soccer coach at Mayfield High School, as well as with the local soccer club. My oldest two are here with me currently, but I definitely want to make sure as young Black men and just people in general, that they understand a lot of things about their civil rights and what the people have gone through before them. I also work for the government, so there are different things in that perspective as well, where civil rights come into play may not be as broadcast as we've seen it lately, but it's still there somewhat behind the scenes. So that's my perspective I'm bringing today.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Miranda Praya.
Hi, I'm Miranda Praya. I'm a member of the EYEJ Youth Council, and I'm also a second year at Case Western Reserve University, double majoring in sociology and psychology. And that kind of brings me where I am today, because I grew up in East Cleveland. So I witnessed the disadvantages my people faced and experienced. And I'm very passionate in trying to make change so they won't have to experience those things anymore.
Great, thank you. So let's jump right on in. The Youth Online Discussing Justice series covers a plethora of topics exploring money, conflict resolution, and now civil rights. So Mai, why did you feel that for EYEJ, this was an important topic to bring to the program and young people, and what are you hoping will be the impact of youth-led conversations around civil rights?
Well, first off, I want to just explain a little bit about EYEJ and that our YODJ and discussion series program, where we talk about relevant topics that youth face. We've been doing this for 6.5 years and served 1,500 students, and we've had over 650 people help make this happen. And the reason why I bring that up is that our 650 people have been incredibly diverse, just like you're seeing on this panel. And so in particular, we might partner, for example, a doctor from Cleveland Clinic with a returning citizen to talk about something like civil rights and to have a discussion with our youth, so that they can hear different perspectives about the topic and learn from each other, because the kids a lot of times have more insight than our adults at times. And so I think that's a very powerful tool in order to create solutions around social justice. And before we go into the question, Kenyatta, I also, and this will lead into kind of the answer to your question, I'd also like to dedicate, in addition to Tamir Rice, this EYEJ Speaks to Adele Johnson, who passed away yesterday, which I got to spend a lot of my time growing up with her. And the reason why I bring this up is she is the one who actually taught me a lot about civil rights and also her time with Black Panthers. And as you know, with curriculum growing up, when I was growing up, we didn't necessarily have a truthful history of our past in this country or the world. And, according to, I found the statistics, according to Southern Poverty Law Center, which is an incredible organization, they did a study on the education about civil rights in the United States and called it dismal. They actually did a rating and found that 35 states received an F score for their teaching of civil rights in this country, which is really horrible, but also leads to why we teach civil rights and talk about civil rights in our YODJ and discussion series, because the truth of it is that many of our youth really don't know about the history of civil rights or the civil rights movement. And also in our civil rights curriculum, we also go in depth about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And what's really scary is that, and again, this is not just for the youth that we serve. This is including my daughter. This is including many different type of school districts. They're not discussing this. And if they are learning about the Constitution and Bill of Rights, like me, who learned about it in the second grade, 35 years, we don't remember anything about it. Because as you know, with topics and discussion, we need to repeat it. We need to constantly talk about it, especially something like civil rights. And so I just want to encourage, I'm not going to talk too much today because we have such a great panel, but I just want to encourage parents that are listening to this to encourage your students, I don't care what background you're from, to really learn this summer about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, especially what we have coming up with the election.
Thank you. Thank you. Very relevant. So Miranda, this question is for you. On Juneteenth, the Youth Council released a statement about the interest to focus on the digital divide and connectivity in Cleveland. Now, this, of course, is a significant civil rights issue, as broadband is a lifeline for so many communities and is necessary for full participation in the modern economy. Can you speak to why the council decided to focus on this issue and how you hope to bring about greater attention to the lack of access in communities of color and low-income communities in Cleveland?
This is a good question. Okay. So I want to start by saying that many individuals from EYEJ have experienced the dilemma of transferring to online remote classes from the traditional in-class lectures, just like many of the students we've served and other youth in our city. However, they didn't have the resources needed to make that switch. So focusing on connectivity is very important to our council because it will help us connect with the youth and help the youth connect with the world. So bringing attention to those who lack access won't be very difficult, given the fact that they know it's needed and it's a necessity. It's all a matter of getting the word out and getting people on board.
Great, thank you. And I encourage everybody to check out the amazing EYEJ blog post that was done by the Youth Council. You can find it online, and it's just a really powerful statement coming from the youth perspective. So now we're gonna open this up to everybody. With all of the protests and demonstrations that have happened in this country and around the world, quite frankly, we've seen diversity in the people protesting, Black, white, Asian, Indigenous, Latino, coming together to speak about policing, racism, and unjust system. So how can we leverage this moment in history to have a national discussion about race from a systemic change, looking at it through the lens of coalition building? And what should coalition building from an advocacy, grassroots, and even a youth perspective look like at this point in time?
Something that, oh, sorry. I was just going to say something that I think is important to keep in mind for coalition building is that we're always conscious that the voices of those who are directly impacted are always centered. So obviously we need everyone to participate and advocate for systemic change. There's room for everyone at the table, but I think that it's important that when we're organizing and when we're working for change, that we are centering Black voices and experiences, and that we are making an effort to listen to those who have directly experienced the impacts of discrimination. So that's just kind of something that I think is important to keep in mind as we do this work.
Anybody else?
The other thing about coalition building is when you're talking about everyone at the table, that the police are also people. And so on a grassroots level, to actually have a conversation, learn the chief's name, have them learn your name, have that conversation, and appeal to the humanity that's in each of us. So the very things that the protesters are demanding, those attributes also exist in these individuals, the police. So it's not just the police department, it's these actual individuals. And so those conversations of listening to their perceptions of the communities so that they actually are knowing you as Lori and not as a 50-something-year-old Black woman, right? That perhaps might think twice when acting, or perhaps speak up. This is towards coalition building. So then you get to that point of relationship where they're more amenable to be at the table when you're discussing issues. But that needs to happen first. That relationship building is critical, on all levels. And anyone can do that. Any citizen can do that. An event just happened, I think yesterday in Shaker, where the Shaker police ended up playing ball with a group of kids, right? And it was just very powerful. You hear those kind of things happen, dotted throughout the country, and it always makes that special interest story. Probably happens a lot more than what makes the news. But to capitalize on that and talk to them, not necessarily the beat cop on the street, but make an appointment and meet the lieutenant or the chief, people who can affect change, and listen, and then hopefully you can have a dialogue to just get to know one another first. So I think that's critical in any relationship. I mean, any forward movement. It can't just be an us and them. You need to give them a face and give a name and understand their perspective. And they will listen. I am married to a law enforcement officer. And so as you can imagine, just through the years, we've had several different conversations, and most recently with what's happening, to get the perspective of the culture, that cop culture, which is alive and well. But even putting that aside of just talking to a police officer as a person, as you want them to do, and he says 10 times out of 10 times, unless you're really dealing with someone who really shouldn't be a police officer in the first place, other than that, you can appeal to the humanity and have a decent civil conversation of just getting to know each other, especially when you're talking about kids, what their activities are, and just kind of humanize them. And they will listen. That's my main message.
Thank you. Okay. And I would say along that same line, in terms of communities coming together, there's also been this conversation. I've had the conversation with people. I've seen this conversation online, that while it's great that everybody is coming together at this point, that Blacks didn't create the system that we are currently under. So why should we fix it? This is something that people have talked about, that white people need to step up and use their privilege to make change in this system. So my question is, what is the work that you feel white people need to do in order to address civil rights? And quite frankly, what is the benefit for white Americans to enact change in these systems when these are institutions and systems that benefit them?
Well, I absolutely think it's important for white people to recognize their privilege as well as the system they've benefited from. I think it will also help if they realize that the same system they benefited from is the same system that has brought down people of color, predominantly Black people, and has been continuing to do so. So because of this, supremacy amongst the white has been the standard for this country. Therefore, I feel as if they should help us dismantle the system and rebuild it, because they've built the system, they can easily change it, which they benefit more from, which is leaving us, in the dirt, basically. So that's what I think.
If I could chime in, it seems to me that most of the institutions of American society are controlled by white people. And those institutions have been created to stay in control of the majority and repress African Americans, Native Americans, and Latinos as well. I believe the police are a case in point, and I agree that it's useful to talk to police on a human level. But as an institution, historically, the police were created as slave hunters and to repress slavery and to make sure that slaves stay in their place. And in some ways, the institution of law enforcement is the same today. The civil rights laws that were passed primarily by white legislators, and they still have deference and give deference to the police as a source of imposing control and law and order. The very few schools, I believe, teach students of any color what the Bill of Rights say and what it means. And I believe that for students, it's a good place to start to know your rights and to exercise them. So I come from a very definitive standpoint, and I have a bias as a criminal defense lawyer, as a civil rights lawyer. I'm not anti-police, but I see police as a institution of repression, historically anyhow.
No, I agree. And another disenfranchised group are poor whites. And I want you to say that, sociologically, the police and that strata fits into that. They're not, economically, they are not high on the ladder if you look at the strata of institutions that are power. And so I wholeheartedly agree with you. One comment I just want to interject, and I don't know if this is a good place, but thinking of the audience, one thing that has eroded in schools are student councils. That is a mechanism from elementary school through high school. Colleges still have student councils, but they are also eroding in terms of people seeing any point in being a part of any kind of congregate group that it has a voice to whatever establishment. And so what a student council teaches a young person is not only that they have a voice, but how to exercise that voice in a proper manner. And that training can build so that when they get to the point of being adolescent and being impassioned, as we're seeing now, that they have some tools. And so one of the critical things that I see is lacking is that people have a lot of emotion, a lot of passion about wanting to make change, but they do not have the tools in which to do that. So learning the Bill of Rights and learning the Constitution, absolutely. But you have to marry that with, okay, now what? And how do you go about fighting those things? So and I don't think that is unintentional, that has happened, in different districts. Some of it's economic or just is usually a staff teacher or perhaps a principal that has instituted that. It used to come part and parcel as part of schools. And just throughout my schooling, it just became less interest, less marketing of the importance of it. And I don't know of any in Greater Cleveland that are viable right now on the elementary school level.
And Lori, I will agree with you, no question, because student council also teaches you politics. But I think they have also been shaped in a different way, and that's why Cleveland has several youth councils, like obviously EYEJ right. Youth Council. So kids can always form their own. Obviously come join other youth councils as well.
Mm-hmm. No, and which is great. I would invite people, and you're doing the work, but with other groups, to know what all those where they all are.
Yeah.
So there's a concerted effort and the marketing to invite other students. I think a district-wide council is, of course, much more powerful than the individual, school district. So that can happen to make your voice even stronger. But what happens on the very local level, learning how to navigate within your own
Community.
little system, just your community, which for a child is school, right? And you start out small and then work outwards, so that when you see all these larger than life, seemingly unsurmountable issues, you know, you don't know where to start. And so that's why I was saying, like, the individual student council, and to the parents who are listening, that is something you can advocate for easily, to institute that in your child's school. And then you have that, you know, the class representative, and then you have the president, all of that structure that exists to learn how that mechanism can work in terms of having a representative. And ultimately, you know, you want that to lead to why we should vote, right? But just to say somebody turn 18 to vote, why? They haven't seen any benefits from that ever working. And so that's the other reason why, just as an exercise of seeing that representation, and if you don't like who's representing you, you vote them out, get someone new. You know, it may be you, but that entire process is invaluable.
Yeah.
So I just want to interject, that is something that's very doable, that can teach children what the process is, and then map that against the laws of the, you know, whether it's local laws or the Constitution. They have something to map that against.
100%. And I think I just need to make this statement too, back to Kenyatta's question, that it's important for me to say that it is absolutely up to white people to make change in this country. Black people are exhausted and tired, and that's, you know, one part of it. But again, white people hold the power, they hold positions, they control a lot of, obviously, politics. Money is funneled in this country. But the one worry that I have is we're very off balance right now, where I see a lot of white people that are really stepping up to the plate to learn about what's going on, getting yourself educated, which is amazing. But it's really not enough. You have to keep in mind that this has been going on for hundreds of years, hundreds and thousands, and are being murdered. And really taking that step to create action is very important. So I just wanted to express that. And I think a lot of white people may feel stuck, you know, and it's a very, you're going to go through a lot of emotions during this process. But one thing I just want to say about privilege is not a bad thing. Privilege can be very powerful, but it's about acknowledging your privilege, understanding the situation, and what you do with that privilege. That's what is very important.
And just to chime in on that as well, I completely agree with Mai 100%. But there are quite a few white people who don't know about their privilege that they have. As Gordon mentioned, the system has been set up, you know, and designed for a lot of people to control everything, and for their kids and their grandkids to just walk into it. So they just continue the whole process of what they've learned and what they've seen without realizing or acknowledging anything on the side or what could possibly be wrong about what they're doing. So it is great that a lot of white people are stepping up, and it's quite amazing that they're coming to the level that they are. My girlfriend is white, and there's a lot of things that she may not have known about that I've gone through or I've experienced the same, and same thing on the other side for her. Some things that she's gone through and she's experienced that I've never heard about. So it's all about teaching and learning on both sides of it, and then growing together and using that privilege that white people do have to go forward and to help all people of color. I mean, no matter who it is. I mean, in helping people of color, they're also helping themselves as well. So the whole thing is a big circle and a big cycle. So just by helping out and learning more, it's helping themselves and everyone as well.
One more point, I'm sorry, but I think what is a beautiful thing happening right now is that, you know, we have been manipulated in this country to really, okay, black against white in a lot of ways. And what I'm seeing is a lot of people, just like in these protests, people from all different backgrounds are really realizing that it's not about black versus white. It's all of us against this white supremacy that has caused so many issues in this country.
I hate to be skeptical and somewhat cynical about it all, but having lived through the 60s and 70s, where we had assassinations of 3 leaders, where we had street violence, etc. And we ultimately ended in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was a plus. Things have not changed that much. And there's been a lot of talk, and now a lot of people are coming to the table. And I think all of that is good. But quite frankly, we have seen this movie before, and very little has changed in this country, notwithstanding what we went through, including the assassination, Martin Luther King, John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Malcolm X, Edgar Evers. And then we've had school violence as well. And we really haven't traveled very far.
Yep. And I will lend some perspective. I will lend some perspective on that because I had my own experience last week with, a group. But what I see is people are very afraid and have a lot of fear to go outside of their circle or their bubble at the same time. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be because no one group can solve these issues on their own. It's impossible. We have got to work together. And so I think what's happening, what is needed in this country with our youth, with adults, is that we've got to be more open-minded. We've got to really pay attention, not let our anger really control our actions, but really paying attention where of the openness that's occurring, possibly bridging with people that you're not really used to bridging with, because there are people who are definitely fighting, who are definitely caring about the situation that we're in.
Very well stated. Thank you. I'm going to pivot a little bit. And before I do, just if anybody in the audience has any questions, please put them in the Zoom chat or the Facebook chat so that we can read those. We're about to start into Q&A time momentarily. So if you have any questions, please send those in. And while we're waiting, I want to ask you, Lori. No, I'm sorry. Let me ask Emily, as we want to get to some of the work that she's doing. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing? I think that looking at the issue of redlining is one of those important issues that is still impacting communities today. Can you provide that historical context about the system and the legacy that it has on communities and Cleveland specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever I do fair housing trainings, I always start with the historical context of our country's long history of discrimination and discriminatory housing policy. Because without this context, I think it is easy for people to attribute a lot of current issues that they see to maybe individual failures or just poor choices by individuals, but that's really not the case. And when we look at these discriminatory policies and how the system was set up, we see how systemic racism and oppression work, all the intricate ways that they have affected our communities and continue to impact our communities. So just a brief overview of redlining for those who aren't familiar. Redlining refers to the practice in the 1930s and 40s where communities of color were basically fenced off and marked as hazardous by the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And what this did was discourage banks and lenders from giving loans or mortgages in those neighborhoods. And it really kept communities of color out of the American dream of home ownership. And really perpetuated segregation and inequality. And so even though redlining has been outlawed for over 50 years, we still see its effects today in Cleveland. So Cleveland is actually considered a hyper-segregated city It's one of the most segregated metropolitan cities in the country. If we look at Cuyahoga County's redlining maps from 1940, if you compare that map to a map from today, things really have not changed much when we look at racial segregation and where people are living and who has access to opportunities and resources. So on the redlining maps, the original ones, there's kind of a C-shaped area on the east side of Cleveland, and that's still the same area that we see have concentrations of housing vouchers. That's a big thing that we talk about, because even though, so when people have housing choice vouchers, the idea is that they have a rental subsidy that will help them really have housing choice and be able to move into a community with the resources they're looking for, and access to opportunities that they need. But aside from a select few communities, it's completely legal at the moment for landlords to refuse to accept vouchers. So what we see is that in a lot of the higher resource communities where folks might ideally want to use their voucher, they're pretty much restricted. And so they end up limited in their housing choice. And so it makes it tough to move past the segregation that we see and to move forward to true integration and true equitable communities. So even though redlining, the practice is outlawed and illegal, I want to note that there are a lot of new, more subtle ways that segregation still persists and still exists in our communities all over, but in Cleveland as well.
And just building on the impact of redlining, can we talk about the current impacts around criminal justice, education, wealth, even technology, and what advice and information can we provide to organizations and political leaders to begin addressing the determinants of redlining?
Miranda,
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
Miranda, I don't know if you want to talk about a little bit about your focus area for the Youth Council, but something that I can add is, we have, in regards to redlining, we have an incredible problem in the city where approximately 30% of our youth do not have access to internet, and almost 3/4 do not have access to devices. And so this is a focus of the Youth Council that they on their own decided to focus on versus, police brutality and all that's going on in COVID-19, because they feel like that is real opportunity for us to really create realistic impact that can empower our youth for their future.
Yeah, and to add on to that, speaking personally, that's something that I see that's important to the youth in my community. And they also feel as if it's a civil rights issue due to the fact that that's where they get a lot of their information from. So if there's no resource or access to technology, how can they really learn about what's going on in the world?
Very true. I want to interject because we have a question from Shelley Saltzman. Thank you, Shelley. And her question is, isn't a key to addressing the issue and breaking the cycle that Gordon discussed a systemic approach with a lot of conveners? When discussing the civil rights of students in schools, does it make sense for schools to examine the progressive discipline system that acts like police structures with detention, suspension, and expulsion? Isn't that teaching students compliance versus advocacy? Are these practices taking away student rights and leading to a school prison pipeline, especially for Black students?
Well, I'd like to address the second part a little. A lot of things that have happened with the policing in schools was just allowed to happen without much question from the community as to why. Where is the data that says this is necessary to have security guards in schools? That's the first thing. This question, not just passively accepted that that's where we are. That's the state of things. In terms of, I've always taught when I was in parent training that the first thing you do when you get your hit stop is know that handbook, know what the laws that are governing the children are, because that's what you're fighting. You're not fighting against individual teachers. You're not fighting against the principal or even the school system. Mm-hmm. You're following those laws that are already on the books, which you take it, again, from that level, micro level, that can extrapolate onto the things that are Gordon are talking about. But you have to know how to do that. And so knowing that handbook, which explicitly states most of the time, you have a number of hours or a number of days to be able to fight expulsions, that you have a right to a meeting prior to your child being sent home. All those kinds of things, those kinds of legal things that are all spelled out, but you have to take the time to read it because people will misuse it. And as we all know, children are being mistreated or unjustified suspensions or expulsions, what have you. So that's the first thing, that you have to know what's in the book. And then the second thing is the things that you want to challenge, you have some kind of a format, you have something to stand on as to question why. How did this come to be? Know when amendments were made and under what conditions and all those kinds of things to educate yourself on what is happening. But that, against what I said earlier, the student council, right, those things don't seem that they could coexist, and they can't, because I think that you're reading that the prison pipeline is alive and well, period, right? It's alive and well. And the conditioning that goes for those who are watching it happen is just as powerful as what's happening to primarily those Black boys that's happening to, right? That you're saying that becomes acceptable because that's just the way it is passively. And so I also want to interject at this point about the media, and that it's intentional. And we keep seeing the same images over and over and over again to become desensitized of what happened. It's primarily, recently with George Floyd, to question that. Why is that? Right? And what's happening when that happens? That we're seeing in these images of someone being killed over and over again, that it's larger than that's an institution as well. So I want to interject that too, because that's a separate fight. But back to this, I don't want to get away from your question. You're absolutely right. The students' compliance versus advocacy. Yes, it is definitely one of the things that students and parents in that community are accepting of the changes that have happened in the last 20 years in public schools.
I just want to reiterate too, because we work with, for example, Cleveland Metropolitan School District, and they're constantly talking about, reducing suspension rates and all that. But again, just to kind of back up what Lori is, like, I think we need to cut the BS. Like we're just like in this vicious circle. We really need to have systematic change and fight for policy change, straight up.
Also, regarding student rights, I teach a course at the law school on prisoners' rights. And quite frankly, there is a very clear similarity between the rights of students and the rights of people who are incarcerated. Knowing the handbook makes sense, but the Constitution has limits once it enters the school. And students have limited rights based on the principal and the teachers knowing best, which they may. But students' rights are maybe an oxymoron.
Yeah, and that's why I was not terming it as rights, just talking about the handbook that governs children, the kids. Yeah, there's very limited. And the idea, even the notion of student rights has kind of emerged as, I think in 1986, and I went to this march, and I don't want to misquote what it was called, but it was a march on children's rights, and almost a manifesto of the rights of children, and that has morphed into some of what you see in terms of advocacy. But you're fighting a losing battle because you need to know what is on the books of the governance in the first place, and that's the only point that I was making. But it's not about rights; it's about what a district has put in place to govern children, period. It has nothing to do with, it's not children's rights. It's what we are doing to the children if these things happen. Here are the rules of this, 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 and this. And knowing what those are is the first point of changing any policy. You have to know what's there. And that's the point I was making. But Gordon's absolutely right in terms of student rights. And I intentionally didn't use that because I don't even frame it that way in my mind, of the rights of students, because essentially a minor doesn't have any. I mean, that's not, in vogue to say that, but it's true.
Yeah.
You don't, but parents do, and parents have that voice and that right to challenge things. And what's good for what you see happening to one group, it usually doesn't come to the fore until it happens to someone perhaps outside that group. Wait a minute, say that's not right, and then it's questioned, and then it becomes an issue. Otherwise, it's just what has happened now is the states are just passively. People don't read it, and people don't know what it is. And when things are happening to children, and people don't have a recourse on how to fight, and being angry and being emotional, as we know, will get you nowhere. So that's the point I was just making in terms of arming yourself.
So that's why it's detrimental that, just being very honest, that it is detrimental that we empower our youth and amplify their voices and teach them about, for example, government, how to create policy, how to create social policy awareness and programming to make change. It is our job to raise them because they are our future, and we have completely set them up for failure. And reform is the only way. Systematic change, health reform, police reform, reparations and building generational wealth is the only way to create positive solutions in this country. And we all need to be focused on it.
Well, thank you. We have run out of time, but we would like everybody, all of the panelists, to provide just a brief, no more than 1 minute, key point that they hope viewers take away from today's conversation. We'll start with Andre.
Okay, so I'd say there are so many different key points that were touched upon in this conversation today, but one in regards to civil rights is to know that you have those, that you have rights, and they're not supposed to be stepped upon, and that you can actually fight for what's supposed to be yours. And in learning, as Lori mentioned, and learning different things aside from a handbook, but learning about history and different things that you can utilize and use as sort of a shield to help you block all the negatives that's coming your way in regards to your rights that you don't get. They're there, so you can actually utilize them. You have tools in different areas, especially from kids from YODJ to EYEJ to different institutions, from CASE and different. Everyone, there are different resources out there for everyone to reach in regards to your civil rights. So know you have them, and know there are ways to make sure that you keep them and that they're utilized.
Thank you. Gordon?
Well, I would say demand to be heard, and don't fall asleep at the wheel. Mm-hmm. Don't take for granted the comfort some of us may enjoy to suggest that we live in an equitable society and culture. We don't.
It looks like Gordon's
Yeah.
screen froze, so we will go to Miranda.
A takeaway I have for our viewers is that history tends to repeat itself. So it's our job to make sure our voices are heard and the youth voices are heard to make sure that we make change.
Thank you. Emily?
I just want to say that we need everyone to really, if we're going to really create this systematic social change and create equitable communities, create a world that we haven't seen yet, but that we would like to see. We need everyone's voice matters. And there's so many different ways to get involved. I think that people absolutely should not think that they're not needed in the movement, or because they don't feel directly affected that they're not needed. It was mentioned before, there's so many ways to use privilege for good. And so I just want people to remember that we need everyone if we're going to really make change.
Right. Lori?
I would say, just to add something different from the others, that you can identify exactly what it is that you're fighting, that you're precise in that. Because it becomes very emotional, very taxing, physically and emotionally, doing this kind of work. And so that while you are aligning yourselves with other advocates and allies, that you are clear on what the power structure is and who you're fighting. That you don't become entangled in tangential issues that are important, but they could take you off your course and sap your energy. So that I would offer that.
Okay. And Mai?
Just 2 points. I want to just really express that this is not a trend. This is an important matter that needs to be in our discussions every single day, no matter who you are. But also that our giving campaign, our Empower campaign, is really important to empower youth, just like Miranda. We are doing the work, and those dollars are very important for us. So if you have $1 to donate, we really appreciate it. If you don't, please share our campaign. That would be very meaningful for us. Thank you.
Great. And just in closing, I just want to say this has been a powerful conversation, and I am honored that I was able to moderate as a volunteer of EYEJ and just see all of the great and powerful work that you all are doing around youth justice. And for anybody that's watched and wants to hear more, the conversation is not over. We ran out of time on today's program, but Andre is working behind the scenes on a very powerful podcast. So we will continue the conversation there. There were so many questions we didn't get to today. So stay tuned for that. And check out our blog and website for other information. There are some great articles up there talking about some of the things we covered today. I would like to thank the EYEJ team for all of their work on EYEJ Speaks. Tara, Andre, Mega, Jay Wynn, Anna, Haley, and Pia. Thank you for all of the work that you do day in and day out to make this possible. And to Mai's point, the work that we are talking about today and civil rights, this is part of a larger conversation that EYEJ has with its young people through the Youth Online Discussing Justice series. So if you want to be part of this work and support this impactful work, please join our Empower campaign. You can text 44321. And definitely check out our website, EYEJ.org. There's a lot of great information up there, and your contributions and your support gives a voice to over 1,500 young people annually, and it's supporting this type of great programming. So we will see you next week, Thursday at 10 a.m., and we will be discussing achieving a positive mindset. So we will have a new panel and we will see you then. So have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.